Welcome, fellow brave believers. I'm Sean. You're watching Kingdom in Context. I want to thank you for joining me here tonight. We're going to have another fun episode of Lean Knots. We got some cool issues to discuss, as well as some amazing scriptures to review, hopefully to edify you, to bring you further into your discipleship under Yeshua of Nazareth. And we have some awesome guests as well. So I want to give a big shout out and thank you to everyone that's in the live chat. You guys are awesome. Thank you for your positive comments. Thank you, admin, for being here to help keep everything under wraps in case people get triggered from some of the topics that we talk about tonight. And yes, that's right. What you did see was a teaser for something we've been working on. In addition to the Kingdom in Context app, we've been working on a game called Wisdom Guard. So this is going to be a Unity-based actual video game where it's scriptural trivia mixed in with some really fun stuff that hopefully the whole family can enjoy and learn the scriptures at the same time. So be looking out for that here in the next few months as that gets finished. And without further ado, we have some fun things to talk about tonight. So I'll go ahead and bring on our guests. First person we want to welcome tonight is Josh from Founded Earth Brothers. Welcome, brother. Oh, let's take you off mute real quick.
Am I muted? There you go.
There you go. We got
you guys hear me? All right. Yeah. Now. Hello, family. It's great to be back on here on my favorite YouTube channel of all time, or one of my favorites. I don't want to upset some people. So yeah, this is a blessing. I think this is going to be fun. There's some awesome other brothers on the way in.
Yes, we also have our brother Russell LaFleur from the Berean Dialogues. Welcome back, brother. Good to see you tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and we also have Chris Bailey from Take on the World TV.
How's it going, everybody?
Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Sean.
And Chris, you guys have a conference coming up, right? You want to talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, that's coming up November 17th through the 20th. It is the Take on the World. Unfortunately, it's virtual. The 2022 event. We're going to have uploaded presentations on the channel, so you could just come and check out our channel. I'm going to throw it in the link in the live chat for you guys to make sure you guys go subscribe. And then we're going to be having some debates as well. We're working on those. I could tell you right now, Sean is going to be a presenter, and he's going to be doing a very similar presentation, if not the same presentation you're going to be doing at Flagtoberfest, which is coming up. And we're also going to be having you do a live debate, futurism, which we're going to be talking things tonight that apply to that versus did the millennial already happen? So it's going to be a really lively debate. And the point of the debate isn't to like who won, who lost. It is really at the end of the day to let you guys both see the information presented, make up your own mind, but how brothers in faith can actually have proper discussion with one another. And so that's going to be super important. So
yeah, I think it'll be great. And the first presentation that you mentioned that we'll be doing is investigating Babylon. So a lot of people have seen that. That's like a 21-part series on my channel. So it's a lot of information, but I've been asked to speak on that. So I had to condense it down to like 2 hours. So it's basically, I'm just going to make a lot of people mad in a short amount of time. And then hopefully they'll go to the actual series on the channel so they can get all the fullness of the 30 something hours plus of information to expound upon all that. But it's I'm still finalizing that presentation. It's been really challenging to figure out like what important pieces do I need to keep and what can I skip for the sake of that night, and so we'll see. Hopefully the Father will help me get the right info in there, But Russell, how you been, brother? It's good to have you back on the channel. Russell of the Berean Dialogues. Many of you guys may remember he's interviewed me a few times for his podcast. Welcome back, brother.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, and the last time you were on, we were talking about with your buddy John. We were talking about the rapture. And
yes, sir.
Going over the eschatology of that. So that was a fun video. And then Josh, how you guys doing at Founded Earth Brothers?
Doing great, man. I'm looking forward to meeting you in person and seeing you speak. That's one of the main.
Are you going to be at Flagtoberfest?
Yeah, I'm going. I bought tickets, front row seats, so I could sit there and yell out a little bit, like I know him. Like the crazy fanboy stuff. It'll be fun.
That's funny. Well, yeah. I'm going to have a table, so like people can just come and talk to me when I'm not.
Okay, good.
I'll only be on stage for like 2 hours out of 3 whole days, so most of it will just be me talking with people at the table. I'm sure.
Yeah.
So we have plenty of time. All right, guys. Well, without further ado, let's jump into. Thank you so much for the super chat, Stephen Flores. I appreciate that. And tonight we're talking about some interesting concepts, right? As you guys may have seen from the announcement and the thumbnail, Amazon, big, massive 30% market share in the whole world, Amazon, has announced that they would actually like to implement into all across the world palm reading scanners. And if you guys give me just a minute, I'm going to bring up this article from this announcement, and we'll get you guys' thoughts on this. So this is quite shocking to me, personally, because this is a big deal in my opinion.
Yeah.
Okay, is it showing? Okay, there it is. All right. So the article's basically, let me try to make it bigger for people to see it, kind of read along, try to ignore whatever advertisements you may see with the article. But the article basically says Amazon wants to speed up shopping trips by letting users pay with the palm of their hand. The company on Tuesday launched Amazon One, a new biometric technology that enables shoppers to enter and pay for items at stores by placing their palm over a scanning device. In order for it to work, users first have to connect their palm to a store credit card. Keep that in mind, guys, because it's going to come up at the end of the article as well. After that, users are able to pay with their hand. To start, Amazon One will be an entry option at 2 of its dozens of cashierless Amazon Go stores, located near its Seattle headquarters. And over time, Amazon plans to introduce the technology at more of its physical stores in the coming months. Amazon also hopes to sell the palm scanning technology to other companies like retailers, stadiums, and office buildings. The company said it's already in active discussions with several potential customers. It's a model Amazon has experimented with before. And in March, Amazon said it will begin selling the technology powering its cashierless stores called Just Walk Out, which allows shoppers to enter a store by scanning an app and then exit without waiting in line. Cameras and sensors track what items customers choose and charge them when they leave. Amazon's efforts to license technology to other retailers could hit some roadblocks. It's unclear whether competing retailers will want to adopt the technology in their stores and potentially hand over customer data to a rival. And that's, to me, that's something I want to talk about. That's crazy from a business perspective, what Amazon is audaciously asking permission to do. Dilip Kumar, Amazon's vice president of physical retail and technology, told Recode that Amazon One would collect data on where customers shop, but not what they purchase or how much time they spend in third-party stores, because that's already collected on your credit card statement. Amazon is a powerful retail player, both online and offline. Amazon is expected to claim nearly 40% of the e-commerce market this year and has made significant inroads into the brick-and-mortar retail space with a slew of Go stores, Whole Foods locations, 4-star stores, and Amazon Book locations, along with a new chain of fresh grocery stores. Shoppers may also be wary to hand over biometric data to one of the country's largest retailers. Amazon addressed privacy concerns in the launch of Amazon One, saying it designed the technology to be highly secure. Palm images aren't stored on the Amazon One device and are instead encrypted and stored in a secure area that was custom built in the cloud. Amazon One users will also be able to request to delete their biometric data after using it, either via the device or online. Amazon said it chose to use palm scanning technology because it's considered more private other than other biometric alternatives, which include things like eye scanning technology or facial recognition. And here's the favorite line, in my opinion. You can't determine a person's identity by looking at an image of their palm, Amazon said. So many things to discuss. Who would like to go first?
Well, I could tell you guys, I mean, right off the bat, I've seen this technology. It's at the Whole Foods by us. Didn't know what it was, obviously, right when I saw it, but it is, there's a very tight connection. Obviously, if you know, Amazon owns Whole Foods. So right there, they've always had the pickups in their stores, but now they're implementing this right in the Whole Foods. What you really don't think too much about. Well, this year, here in Ohio, this is something since COVID's hit, right? And it's becoming this fast track, right? We can see so many things that's happened since COVID, but as we get to, this ushering in of this cashless society, which has been prophesied for some time to come, our Cedar Point, which is one of the largest amusement parks in the world, this was the first summer that they went completely cashless.
Wow.
You can't
I used to go there when I was a kid.
Yeah, you can't spend cash anywhere. So like you can't buy, a pop. You can't buy, not that I drink pop. You can't even do like the games, the walk-up games, it's all credit card. If you want to knock down, pins to win a bear, it's credit card. Everything in the whole place is by card. They will be instituting, I can guarantee you, this type of technology, which will be connected to some type of Cedar Point card where it has all your funds. You put it on there and, away you go. Because right now it's taking it in. They got the chip reader, takes too much time. And all of this is in regards of safety of you, that you don't have to carry cash, safety that you don't have to touch and handle cash, no transactions back and forth. It's here, it's coming. That
people can be shaking hands with some cellophane in their hand to capture your biometric print, and you're like, "What was that? That was a weird handshake." Walk away with your whole palm print.
Yeah.
I think we need to ask the question: at what point does a precursor no longer stay a precursor? What's going to distinguish a precursor from the actual thing? I think that's really what we need to talk about. Where do we? I know we see the precursor and we go, that is getting a little bit close to to the real thing. But at what point is it the actual mark of the beast?
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Chris?
Wow. To decipher that precursor, obviously, because we're looking at it from something that if we talked about, we'd get banned on YouTube, which is, whatever the term is that we want to use here, the jab, the carrot stick, whatever term people are using. You can see this agenda, right? And this is what is ultimately going to happen with, these stores. It's going to be able to, know your history on these things, right? As that jab is starting to die down, it's not being required. It's the unjab versus the jabbed are now being recognized as equal in most places. Very liberal places, not so much yet, but in most places it's starting to return to normal. Most countries are starting to return to some normality. I definitely see that was a precursor to whatever's coming back, but this is going to be all wrapped within it. And when it hits, there's going to be many people saying, "Oh, we've already seen this. We've seen it in the 80s, and in regards of, the code, the UPC codes, that was the mark of the beast in the 80s, and then every year it's been something different,
Verichip, Digital Angel.
Yeah, right. And the millennial reign people are laughing at us going, all that stuff already occurred and happened. But look, we are in a place right now where this is speeding up at such a rate that I think when we see things that are precursors, we have to have our radars up. Now, we don't have to be the people saying that is the mark, that is this, but our radars have to be so far up, and we have to be guarded spiritually to be able to decipher these things. I think that's the only way we'll be able to decipher those things.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great question, Russell. Josh, what do you think about
Russell's question? Interesting. I was talking to a guy from Canada named Tony, and he said, yeah, and I never thought about this, even though it's right in our face, how they kind of put the truth out there, is that, angels sometimes called messengers, and they're putting this stuff in our bodies called messenger RNA. And asking the whole world. And now when you were reading that article, I was saying how they were saying, this would be something used to scan so that you can even go into the store, not like, oh, it's just helping you buy stuff. This is like, This is how you get
into office buildings, which means your workplace, stadiums, all forms of recreation. And how many churches are going to adopt this?
Yeah. I mean, it's so quick too that this stuff happens. When I was at work and I have all these students, there's, 2,000 people. We have to get them into the school, and now we have to get all of staff members to scan their forehead with these thermometers, and it's like nobody asks questions. I'm like, I'm not a doctor. I'm not someone who should be going up to random people and scanning their foreheads, but here I am going, I got to keep my job, dude. Like if people just do these things so fast, and as much as we hate it, some people it's like, hey, they got to feed their family. They have to have this job, so they're going to do it. And the only other place you could scan somebody with those thermometers was in the wrist. And I'm like, this is just awkward both ways, in the palm of their hand, the forehead. Like, are we really going there with this stuff, getting people into the buildings? Because they couldn't enter the building without doing that. And so, I mean,
that's where I feel like that a lot of this is going to galvanize into groups, businesses, certain sectors of people that are ideologically linked that will refuse this, just like you started to see that happening with the juice, right? The syringe juice. They started to refuse it and become their own little sub-segment within the greater society, which is why there's so many people already talking about United States and engaging in political and economic civil war, and hopefully it doesn't go hot, but like there's a strong divide for people that do not want to give the state more power, which they know ends up giving more, like the WC, the World Economic Union, or the World Economic Council, gives them more power because the United States acquiesced to whatever demands are involved in that. So to me, it just makes me think that's going to galvanize people into their own hypersensitive groups of, we don't participate in that type of tech, and our farmer's market or our tailor shop or our mechanic shop will still take shekels or cash or whatever, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think what what you're saying is even the entrance into the buildings. This is how I think the extreme left, which will be parroted over by the extreme right, which is on the side of the left, to correct the issue right now that's happening, which is the high crime, right? The smash and grab stores, this is all going to be something good, right? Businesses are going to want this because we're going to know who enters into these places. And if they do decide to rob a store, create, things of chaos, like, we saw in Philadelphia recently, and all these things that enter the news, they're going to be able to see these things. And I will tell you, it won't even need to be a palm reader. It will be something right at the door that automatically detects who this person is. And if, you can't get in without these things, right? And if that starts to happen, that's very dangerous.
That's why I pointed out this, because at the end of the article, I mean, obviously I don't believe CNBC is telling us, like, I clearly believe that this article was given to CNBC by people from Amazon. It's fully been crafted exactly how to press release this. I don't think this is just a unbiased analysis by this reporter at CNBC, whose name, by the way, is Palmer, which I think is hilarious. But at the very end of this, they say you can't determine a person's identity by looking at an image of their palm. But yet, earlier up in the article, they already told you that users first have to connect their palm to a store credit card. So it's right there. Like, they know who you are every time you pay for something, every time you enter the building or enter the stadium or the grocery store. Like, they've already, because you remember, you guys, like 2 or 3 weeks ago, Visa came out and was talking about how they were developing a database to categorize everything you were buying. And it was going up on the suggestion of the ESG scores from certain senators. So ESG is the new modern political term for social credit.
Wow.
So they're calling it social credit scoring in China, in the United States, and the Senate. What they're pushing for, they're calling it ESG. So if your credit card already has a documented list and categorized and points awarded to what you're actually buying, they're going to know exactly who you are and where you stand in their society, because this is the plan, is to integrate all this technology together so that they track everything you do, say, and think and buy. So it's going to be wild. Imagine, I mean, we've already got iris scanners and, thumbprint readers just to access their phone. What happens if Samsung one day said it's mandatory to access your phone? So we all need some unlocked phones.
Yeah, some flip phones.
Right. Give me the old Razor. I was fine with it. It was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's wild.
Chris was saying something about, when he said the far left, it brought up a thought. I've been looking into lawlessness, and the difference between keeping the law and lawlessness, and that of course brings you to like Aleister Crowley, where he has his book of the law, is what he calls it. Yeah, he's not copying that from anybody, but his book of the law, which is literally about lawlessness, and they called it. It says the book is often referred to simply as liberal, like liber and then al, which reminds me of like liberal, the liberals, the far left. And I'm thinking that's interesting that they call it that, and that's what they call each other.
The
liberals.
I've never heard that before. It's interesting.
Yeah.
So this makes me think, like, if there's an actual no value, I mean, if it's all digital and it's all just done through biometric reading, it's like, how are they actually going to ascribe any form of, I don't know, I'm thinking of, like, from an economic standpoint, obviously we haven't been on the gold standard in our country for a very long time, but if now it's truly digital and everyone knows it's digital and they don't even need the cotton to print up the fake money that's worth anything anymore, like, and it's literally just ones and zeros, like, how do we ensure the actual security that my ones and zeros are going to be the same amount of ones and zeros at all times, and that ones and zeros is not being lended out to somebody behind the scenes without my knowledge? You know what I'm saying? It's just, there's so much, this whole idea that they keep pushing that it's going to be more safe, more private, more secure if we can get everything to digital, when it's actually less safe, less private, less secure in all ways, from a technological standpoint, as well as, just the whole trust allocation standpoint of who are the people, the banks, what are they doing with money? If people don't know how banks work, they loan your money to make money, right? So they need a store of value given to them and trusted to them. Same thing with politicians. They need you to entrust them with their money so they can then go do stuff with it. So yeah, it's I know there's someone in the crowd right now saying blockchain, and I'm guessing he's saying that's the answer. But who's designing the blockchain? Do they have the backdoor access? You know what I'm saying?
Nobody knows, apparently.
You see, this is the thing and that's touted in the crypto world as being like a good thing, that nobody knows who owns the blockchain. And I'm like, but does that mean we don't know who can actually access it? And I know people are right now probably telling me that's not how crypto works. I'm sure that no one can access the Bitcoin blockchain, and I'm just like going, maybe that's what
it's
they tell us.
Owned by Raymond Reddington.
The Bitcoin blockchain.
Yeah, it's some kind of CIA operative or something.
Yeah. So I just think that's fascinating because, like you asked, Russell, when does the precursor just become reality? Just become actual fulfillment of a verse, right? To me, and that's kind of why I made the joke that I did about the cellophane on the hand, or like some saran wrap on your hand, you like steal someone's print, like that, like I'm a spy movie. Because the natural question of functionality becomes, okay, they think it's more secure because you're not physically carrying a purse or a wallet, but someone could just take your skin print and come in and put it on the palm reader. You know what I'm saying? Why does it have, if it's not like shooting a laser into your skin and taking your blood pressure or something, how is it actually, how it can easily be faked? And that could be the next progression in this, is that actually get the implanted chip, right? So that's where, a lot of people, but my answer, Russell, to your question would be the qualifier, in my understanding from scripture, and this is what a lot of our Investigating Babylon series was about, was that until we're not in the moment where we get the actual mark. We may have a lot of predecessors to the mark that condition people to be ready for it and not think it's scary technology. But the actual mark itself, from my understanding of Revelation 13 and the qualifying texts, is when we see the return of a unique character in scripture that's mentioned in Jeremiah 35 named Nergal. The Egyptians called him Anubis. The Greeks called him Hermes. And there was even at one point when the Greeks ruled Egypt that they combined the names and called him Hermanubis. And this was a guy, the Akkadians, the Canaanites, they would refer to as Nergal. The Babylonians also referred to him as Nergal. He was who was also referred to as Hades. He was the right hand of Helios and also under the authority of Ra or Zeus or Baal. And he was dedicated to commerce. So it's very interesting that Revelation 13 talks about this second beast, who is the mouthpiece under the authority of the dragon, under the authority of the first beast. He's like third on the totem pole. And he's the mouthpiece for the first beast, for people to worship the first beast. And he is the one that implements the mark. Rich or poor, free or slave, everyone has to have this to buy, sell, or trade. So that would be my answer, is like, until you see Anubis return,
right?
And he's trying to get people to worship the first beast. So those are some pretty big qualifiers, right? Until that moment happens. So even if he doesn't show up looking like the ancient depictions of Egyptian Anubis with like a chimera, half dog, half man. Say it's just a politician, but then he's getting you to literally worship. And that word worship has a strong history of qualifier in the scriptures. And it's not just someone that you respect as a politician. It literally means you're doing temple sacrifices to that person. And so this is why I've tried to put forward the idea that the first beast, whom the second beast is trying to get you to worship, is the return of Helios or Apollyon, or the, this character is commonly referred to as Nimrod in the Hebrews text. And so,
Sean, let me ask you a question there. On that note, where you talk about the worship, right? Is this something that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the text isn't very quite clear that it's not everybody doing the exact worship. It is that they were worshipped, right? And so, who is this done secretly? Could this be done from that
verse 7 through 10? Yeah, in that same chapter, verse 7 through 10 says the first beast is given the authority to go out and persecute the saints, and every tongue, every tribe, every people group. So, and it says he can overcome them. And so that means, we also see this parallel in Daniel chapter 7. And so that to me means you're not going along with the program if you're getting persecuted, right? So there's probably a lot of people that refuse to worship him, and that's where.
Yeah, could it mean, that we're just not going along with the system, and that we don't know that we have to worship someone, right?
Well, that's why I've tried to put forward
behind the scenes.
Yeah, that's I hear what you're saying, and that's why I've tried to put forward the passage in Revelation 13. It says the second beast can do lying signs and wonders to convince the people to worship the first beast, even as much as calling fire down from heaven. And from an Old Testament perspective, a first century AD perspective, that was the qualifier for ordaining and establishing the tent of tabernacle of tent of meeting in the wilderness, as well as First Kings 8 temple that Solomon built. Was actually fire comes down from heaven to validate the sacrifice. And so to me, that means like that's language that I recognize from the Old Testament that would tell me, no, they've literally built a temple. This dude's literally trying to get traditional worship. And there's people that are resisting. This is why it says in the bottom of chapter 13, whoever refuses to worship the first beast, they'll be killed. So this is why you get that persecution coming in, which would make sense why at that point you enforce this worldwide economic restriction of having to have something on your forehead or your right hand to buy, sell, or trade. It would make sense because people are pushing back against you, right? They're resisting, and you gotta tighten the noose on them to get them to comply. And we saw how people reacted during the last 2 years.
Are you not allowed to say that?
It's all right, man. It's all right. I'll be surprised if I'm still up in a month. It's all right.
Yeah.
Sorry. I just, it's a constant prayer every month. I'm like, oh, I'm still up this month, I guess. Let's protecting us. Who knows?
You know what I found really funny when I first started studying the RFID and digital angel and all that. I remember the first time I saw the advertisement for somebody using the implantable chip, and they were going, it was on the news, I think, and they showed this lady going up to like the door of her work and scanning herself into the door, and then like going up to the soda machine at lunch and like waving her hand in front of the soda machine and getting like some chips and stuff out of the machine. And I remember watching it thinking in my head, it better not be the right hand. And sure enough, it was the left hand. And I don't think that it was a coincidence. I think that was a discussion prior to the filming of that. They were probably like, we can't do the right hand, guys.
That's right.
That'd be cool.
Or the forehead, like she's banging her head on the front of the It's not working. I need my
Can you
chips.
imagine though how much money you'll spend? Like just having a credit card makes it easy to spend money, but just going boop, like there's my drink. Like that's just, my goodness, I don't know how you keep track of everything.
Yeah, it brings a whole new joke to the term tight-fisted.
Yeah.
Like you need to save money, you got to literally close your hand.
Nope.
That's funny.
Give me your money. No, I'm not opening my hand. Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be crazy. But all of this, like I said, when it comes to enforcement, people are kicking back against this agenda, this narrative, which is now literally termed the great narrative amongst the people that think they want to rule us. There is another thing that's happened recently in the United Nations. There was the Prime Minister of New Zealand. Her name is Jacinda Ardern, and she gave a speech about how she wants more collective will amongst the nations to stop disinformation and misinformation. So we're going to check this out real quick and listen to this, because it's just it's crazy to me. 1 second, we get this going here, because this is what they're calling for, right? And the reason I say this is because, I mean, I hope that we can be aware of what's happening right now, so that we can try to warn people, hey, we're going to need a plan to stay in fellowship with one another. Hopefully churches are that we do not know are talking amongst themselves. There's associations of different types of churches. I know a lot of pastors in small towns. They all know each other. Hopefully people are talking about this, about, hey, what happens if, our city councils start saying we need to censor the internet at a local level, and we need to, put these palm scanners in every business and every grocery store in our town. Yeah, let's just listen real quick. Let me know if you guys can hear this. Let's try this. Try this again. Here it goes. This is why some shows like this have a producer. Okay. Can you guys hear this?
This week, we launched an initiative alongside companies and nonprofits to help improve research and understanding of how a person's online experiences are curated by automated processes. This will also be important in understanding more about mis and disinformation online, a challenge that we must, as leaders, address. Sadly, I think it's easy to dismiss this problem as one in the margins. I can certainly understand the desire to leave it to someone else. As leaders, we're rightly concerned that even the most light touch approaches to disinformation could be misinterpreted as being hostile to the values of free speech that we value so highly. But while I cannot tell you today what the answer is to this challenge, I can say with complete certainty that we cannot ignore it.
I'm going to pause real quick. Okay, so she just said, we know there's got to be a way to stop this misinformation while still valuing free speech, which we so highly value, says the lady that literally sent people to concentration camps in New Zealand and restricted their freedom and books being sent to anyway, whatever. So said to someone that's shown that she's not truly about free speech. And it's amazing to me how she's saying, while I can't tell you the answer today, and I don't think she's saying that because she doesn't know the answer. I think she's just not allowed to speak it publicly yet.
Oops.
Yeah, it's pretty funny, but she's trying to be diplomatic.
Do so poses an equal threat to the norms we all value. After all, how do you successfully end a war if people are led to believe the reason for its existence is not only legal but noble? How do you tackle climate? People do not believe it exists. How do you ensure the human rights of others are upheld when they are legal but noble? How do you tackle climate?
Why?
People do not believe it exists.
So you can't hear what she's saying. It keeps skipping, but she's saying, how do you tackle climate change if people don't believe it exists? Because she's talking about how are we going to tackle disinformation. So I don't know why I keep skipping on that part.
Exists. How do you ensure the human rights of others are upheld when they are subjected to hateful and dangerous rhetoric and ideology? The weapons may be different, but the goals of those who perpetuate them is often the same: to cause chaos and reduce the ability of others to defend themselves, to disband communities, to collapse the collective strength of countries who work together. But we have an opportunity here to ensure that these particular weapons of war do not become an established part of warfare. In these times,
okay, guys, in case you're not following in the live chat or anyone else, she just called what she's claiming is misinformation, which is free speech on the internet. This is the context of her speech. She just called it a weapon of war.
Wow.
In case you guys didn't hear that, understand that, because she's got that British sounding accent, and everything's more palatable in that accent. But no, she just said free speech is a weapon of war.
acutely aware of how easy it is to feel disheartened. We are facing many battles on many fronts, but there is cause for optimism, because for every new weapon we face, there is a new tool to overcome it. For every attempt to push the world into chaos is a collective conviction to bring us back to order. We have the means. We just need a collective will.
Wow. Ultimately, I think where this is headed, where this is going to come to a head is going to be, it's not going to be really free speech that they're necessarily worried about attacking. Ultimately, it's going to be the gospel. They're not going to want the gospel to be preached. And I can see it from a mile away.
Yeah, well, because the gospel is literally at its core goes against their agenda. Their agenda says you have to give to the charities we want you to give to for your social credit, give to the governments we want you to, and not question what they're doing, paying for abortions, which goes against, these core fundamental concepts that preachers preach while they're preaching the gospel, and the believers believe while they're believing and following out the gospel. So, I agree with you. Absolutely, Russell. And it's just, they'll never make it that plain, though. Like with the way you just said it, that's pretty obvious. They'll never make it that obvious. They always have to be more subtle about it. Like, oh, we're battling things on many fronts. And I'm like, who are you talking to? Are you talking to me? Or are you talking to the people in that room who think they rule the world?
Yeah.
That are trying to perpetrate agendas onto their people that their people aren't in agreement with? Because, there's pushback all over the world with your agendas. And those are the battles that you're fighting, the fronts that you're fighting. So, this is why I agree with what Russell was saying, and also with Josh, what you were saying earlier about, like, are these I think was it you, Josh, or you, Chris, that were talking about? No, it was Chris. You were asking about the second beast, and as far as will it be public or will it just be stuff done behind the scenes? So I think me personally, just my opinion, guys, you guys are welcome to chime in, but I think personally that the behind the scenes discussions are clearly, Agenda 2030, World Economic Council, the ideas that they want to depopulate, they want to do mass enslavement of all the economies. Even amongst their own private meetings, they may never actually say, we got to stomp out these Christians who believe that there's a creator and his son is this Messiah and that he's coming back to stop all this. They may never actually say that out loud because, it may be taboo amongst their circles to even give credence to that. But everything they're working towards flies in the face of that message.
Psalms chapter 2, right?
Yeah.
Verse 1 and 2. And 3.
You can read it.
Yeah, I can read it. Yeah. Why do the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed, saying, let us break their bands asunder and cast away their cords from us. I believe that's talking about the word of God, probably. He that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh, the Lord shall have them in derision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I definitely feel that when they get together, there are conversations with the most powerful people in the world sitting down, and they are discussing God and his word, Jesus Christ, the all of it.
That's what you're meaning by, you think that the reference to let's cast his bonds and cords away from us, you're talking about they're acknowledging there is an authority over them that they're trying to cast off of them, which comes to that fun conversation. Before the show started, we had a really fun convo about Freemasonry and some of our own experiences. Maybe we should have waited to save that for the show, but basically it makes me think about what you're saying, Russ. It makes me think about that concept of, at some level, is there people that are saying, hey, the narrative of the scripture is the one that we believe the opposite of the narrative of the scripture. And are these people smart enough at any point to think, all right, there's something true about this narrative of the scripture? Like however they twist it and sell the lie to themselves and deceive themselves, I could only guess, right? But as far as then just to say, if they are casting off the cords, which would be the constraints of righteousness, it makes me think about what I mentioned earlier, Revelation 13, where it says the first beast is given authority to go out and persecute people. He's got 42 months. to go out and overcome the nations, and he has the authority to do it. And it's like he's given that authority, right? It's not something that he just shows up and takes on his own.
Right.
And it makes me think, is this just the culmination of the eschatology of the return of Messiah? All this leading up to these events is just like the enemy, the Satan, and everyone underneath his authority, and all the enemy, the kings of the earth, they just finally get tired of trying to play within certain boundary zones. And they're just like, you know what, forget it. We're just going to go and do this. And no matter how many lives are lost, no matter how many, boundaries we remove, which is against God's law, by the way, no matter how many, things that we transgress about this supposed creator's law, that we've been abiding by these imaginary rules this whole time, because our authorities tell us that, no, we need to stay within these constraints. Otherwise, a greater power will step in and stop us. And we see like inklings of that throughout the scriptures. Egypt, Hezekiah's day with the Assyrians, you know what I'm saying? Where it's like it, and that's what I think it's Isaiah 31 maybe, where no, it's not Isaiah 30. Yeah, it is. It's Isaiah 31, Ezekiel 31, where he's talking to he's comparing the king of Egypt. Yahweh's comparing the king of Egypt to warn, or excuse me, he's comparing the king of Assyria, whom he already killed about 50 years earlier during the days of Hezekiah. He's comparing that to threaten and warn Pharaoh of Egypt that you're not greater than this guy, and I took him down. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you need to check yourself before you wreck yourself. So, so yeah, that makes me think. That's a good point, Russell. It makes me think that these guys, at some level, that they know there's some lines they have to stay within.
I mean, there's other passages too, right, guys? What are some other passages, Chris and Josh, that you can think of where people, where God talks about people being the evil people that are in control, or even just ungodly, unrighteous, unsaved people, where they oppose the word of God?
Well, I just hearing that woman talk and her saying words like warfare, to them, the spiritual warfare is so real. That's all they care about. They don't care about, us hanging out and talking about certain things. But when it comes to the stuff that we talk about that's good, bringing people to the Father, like, with the truth about cosmology coming out, I think they felt like they could kind of get it out in a controlled way and make fun of it and kind of shut it up and just get rid of it. And they didn't know the power of the spiritual warfare, how people would take that information, start reading the Bible, start praying, and lives will start changing. And so it's been so powerful. And the same thing happened with the pandemic stuff, is like people started waking up so fast, they couldn't silence people fast enough to stop us, the spiritual warfare from, the side where people were going, oh my goodness, there's evilness and we're fighting against it. And so hearing those words out of her mouth, that the warfare type words with speech, like Sean was saying, that's very telling, that's how they're looking at it. They're looking at this stuff as for what it really is. It's that spiritual warfare, powers of darkness and wickedness in high places.
Yeah, I would say the verse that comes to mind, First John 2:18, where it talks about the Antichrist, but yet there are many Antichrist, right? And so, and whether that context reveals that the Antichrist figure spirit is here, there are all these Antichrist figures always rising and always raising. And I think right now we're seeing it on such a level, right? We've seen it in the past couple of years, right? So politically driven, right? The LGBTQ trans agendas coming through onto the children, right? It's surpassed the freedoms of what you have as an adult in America. It has to be forced on children. And if you oppose that, you're a bigot, you're a racist, you're this, you're that. We see that can only come from one place, right? So I believe, when we start to see this agenda and these world figures, whether they are antichrist, they are definitely antichrists. And we're seeing that, and this has been a very interesting week, because I don't think any of us are probably pro Elon Musk, but some of the things that they're talking about in that video, right, of stopping free speech and stopping this false information, that goes back to what happened to biblical cosmology. For all of us who were in it, we knew when in 2019 they went before the courts. The YouTube went before the courts, and they said, we're going to censor 2 things to stop false information, which is first vaccination, false vaccine information, which now we're seeing. Why would they do that? Because this was already pre-planned, pre thing. That was with childhood vaccinations, which are a whole nother animal and monster in itself, which then became to the current jab that we have. So we must censor that first. But ironically, what was number 2? The only 2 things mentioned: flat Earth. We must censor flat Earth. Why do we need to do that, right? And this week has been so interesting with Elon Musk coming back now, purchasing, it's probably going to be done really soon, this deal with Twitter, reinstating free speech on Twitter. And if you guys don't follow Candace Owens, go to her Instagram page, and the very first thing that she just put out yesterday for first video, which was her talking about the theory of flat Earth and how she doesn't buy into the moon landing. And if she actually researched and got in there, she probably would get sucked into flat Earth. And this is happening from some of the biggest political commentators in the world. And then what happened last night, which is breaking the internet, is the interview Tucker Carlson, Kanye West, where he gets there. And, we've all had our opinion of Kanye putting out the Christian record, going back and forth on, doing some things that are really terrible. And you're like, man, look at this guy. He's just kind of, the new version of somebody who got saved in the 80s, big star, who then faulted and went back. I'll tell you, that interview last night, he sounded different. And, whether he's true or not, he's out there fighting for the unborn Black children. And that is what they want to censor. They want to censor this voice, these antichrist spirits they want to kill, right? And so here are these 3 major political type figures, 2 of them are billionaires, and one of them has a unbelievable reach in the conservative circles, who said some really interesting things that are happening right before our face. And they all have to deal with free speech, right? For Kanye West to be able to give free speech and wear what he wore, which was a sonogram of a baby, to remind people that there are more Black children being killed in the state of New York, in the city of New York City, than there are Black children being born. This is mass genocide on the Black population. And they don't want him saying that, right? He gets all the publicity because he wore a White Lives Matter t-shirt, right? But, we're seeing all of these things happen, and it is a war on this freedom, I think, which will ultimately come back to, and this is the very interesting thing. Kanye West said it, Candace Owens repeatedly says it, and Tucker Carlson said it last night. This whole thing, all of these things are demonic. Very interesting that they're all now turning to this spiritual realm, and wherever their walks are at, they are recognizing a very dark, evil, satanic force. I mean, if you turned on conservative radio and TV shows 5-10 years ago, they weren't saying there's a spiritual battle. Now, can we trust all those people? I'm not here to say that at all. I'm just saying it's all very interesting. And with that video, it's all coming together because they have to continually try to stop this avenue of free speech, which will not allow their agendas to come through for mass manipulation of your mind.
Yeah, it's good points. There's a lot there.
Oh, and real quick, another thing regarding free speech. There was a documentary that just came out. They happened to, the filmmakers who just produced it, they were a part of Take on the World 21. Sean, you were a part of. They only came for a short time. They actually ended up bowing out of the project due to some issues, but the documentary ultimately got done. And our good friend Rob Skiba had a big role in that, along with Peter McCullough, Dr. Malone, bunch of huge names throughout it, Judy Mikovits, And it is called The Greatest Reset. So if you go to greatestreset.movie, greatestreset.movie, if one of the admins, you want to put that in the chat, greatestreset.movie, it is a fantastic documentary. Rob Skiba is in it, and it goes through what we're talking about here tonight, which their ultimate goal is this great reset, which I believe is going to come from either side of the liberal or conservative arm, if it's allowed, because that's their agenda, how that two-winged bird system moves. And so which we have to watch for those signs on either side of that. But it is that great reset that is coming, which is all going to be these institutions of that Amazon palm reader being everywhere, So, and this documentary reveals the truth behind all of that. So this is dealing specifically with the 2 years of our lives being completely shattered, and 60+%, whatever the numbers of people putting foreign objects into their bodies, and what is the outcome going to be of that. So greatestreset.movie is where you can find that.
Cool.
Can I add something to the point of this censorship issue? When you were talking about like all the many different antichrists, when you're against Christ, you're against his word, etc. But when I was listening to you talk, I thought about Romans chapter 1, where it says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold or suppress the truth in unrighteousness." Because, and then he's going to allude to creation, right? He says, "Because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has showed it unto them." In verse 20, "For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power in Godhead, so that they are without excuse." And so the Antichrist spirit, or those who are Antichrist, they are against the truth. They don't like to retain God in their knowledge. So when people are pointing things out about creation, or with the word of God, well, God's word says, 6-day creation, young earth, things like that. They don't like that because they don't want to retain the reality that there is a creator in their knowledge. And so that's ultimately what they're going to want to censor, is anything that comes out of the word of God. Anything that points to the fact that there's a creator, that we are in rebellion against that creator, and we need Jesus Christ and the gospel. I mean, it's the ultimate truth for all of humanity. And the people that are Antichrist want to suppress that truth.
That's true.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's gone mainstream, though. I mean, denying the Father and the Son is like the definition. And so if you can, there's lots of different ways you can do that. And one big one, one of the biggest ones they have is, like you talked about, the truths about creation and the proofs that we have, the footage of the firmament, the laser test, all these scientific things we can do, these groundbreaking things. If it wasn't as powerful as it is, why hide it? If it wasn't going to destroy their lives, why suppress it? Because it's not, how is that hurting anybody? A kid going out with a laser, going over a frozen lake, like, this is scientific stuff. Let them prove that it's curved if it is. Don't censor it. But they know that people are throwing out all these tests that are proving over and over again. I mean, there's literally melted sand on the shoreline of the Red Sea where the pillar of fire was. Like, to this day, it's still there. It's like solid, like glass sand where he parted the sea. So it's crazy that they just, that stuff, why would the elite, if they were writing the Bible like people say, why would they go back and do things like that prove that it's true, and then hide and censor that topic? It's kind of counterproductive to go and do things like that. If because a lot of people, you get into these discussions with truthers and they're like, oh, they wrote the Bible, it's to control you. But there is evidence that they are hiding that proves that it's true, including the world and the shape of it. So if they were the ones that wrote it, they wouldn't have to make all these different denominations and different translation things where they've messed with it. It would have been perfect as it was when they first wrote it. They wouldn't need to change anything and mess with translations. It would just be the way they wanted it, and they would keep it that way and promote it and sell it everywhere.
Yeah, it's interesting the dichotomy you see pushed from a supposed country that touts the idea of the First Amendment with, you know, freedom of religion, freedom of free speech, but now in the past couple decades we see nothing but an encroachment on those ideas to the point where literally to the point where they told people, well, you can't go to church anymore just about a year and a half ago, right? They told people you can't go into your building of worship anymore because there's a emergency greater than your faith. And so which literally was non-existent, you know, I mean, both statistically and with visual eyes that you could see in your hospitals and in your clinics and all around your town. There was no emergency. Yes, people died from it, but it was not emergency. It was a statistical amount of people got sick and another statistical amount died. But at the same time, you have, you know, the whole world reacting like aliens invaded, and you got to stay in your home, can't go anywhere. We'll bring you food with Grubhub and DoorDash. Oh, and you can't go to that church either where you get your faith. You can't go there. No more potlucks, you know, and if you do go, you can't sing because you'd be opening your mouth to worship, and that would be spewing particles onto other people. So you can't worship your God either. So we already seen how they want to encroach on that the moment they feel justified to not get backlash from it, right? And this is just par for the course. This is, you know, the other concept I kind of wanted to lead into tonight is a kind of a more of a scriptural look at some of these ideas to bring it home to our reality. We're all men of the faith. We all believe that we have a creator and that his son is our Messiah, Jesus of Nazareth, and that he's going to come back, as Russell already read in Psalm 2. At the end of Psalm 2, he's the one that's appointed by the Father who's going to shatter the kings and break them like iron, like pottery with an iron rod, and is going to, you know, remove the kings of the earth from the wickedness they're perpetrating on mankind. But there's a pattern all throughout history to where the enemy is like, I remember the first Jurassic Park from 1993, where Dr. Malcolm is, not Dr. Malcolm, but the guy who built the park, he's giving them the tour at the very beginning of that movie, and they go and they look at the T-Rex enclosure, and then they go to the Velociraptor enclosure, and then they say, oh, you've got an electric fence here. And the guy who built the park, he's like, yeah, we see that the Velociraptors are smart, and they test different parts of the fence to make sure it's still on. And that is the mental picture I see of the kings of the earth. Is they're just seeing, are they awake? Are they turned on? Because at the moment they're not, we're coming through like velociraptors, right? And we're gonna devour, right? Kind of like Numbers 13:33. The spies of Israel went into the land of Canaan, and they said, this is a land that it devours its inhabitants.
Wow.
I think that's a very literal statement, guys, because part of the cult worship of Baal and Zeus and Osiris and all those guys is cannibalism of mankind. So it's literally, and I mean, we get this all the way back from Enoch days of the original Nephilim, but we see the Nephilim were in the land. That spirit of the Nephilim, which is the unclean spirits, which animates the Nephilim, like that was the idea of the Nephilim, as an unclean spirit. So that whole spirit can be adopted, and the practices can be adopted by mankind. So this is why we see it's out in the mainstream media. I covered it last year about, you know, some of the spirit cooking stuff that's been highlighted in the media with certain celebrities, as well as in Europe. It's made popular to have a vampiric cults where they get together and they enjoy exchanging each other's blood and drinking it. And, you know, there's the guy on CNN that went to India and that ate part of the brain live on air. You know what I'm saying? The CNN reporter, and he got sick or whatever, and they're making a big deal about it. And so like they're pushing it into the forefront, right? Because they want this to be normalized. That's just one part of their behavior, is those ritual occultic practices. They've already got the whole world eating unclean and thinking that's okay. That's another part of a strong part of their behavior, as well as denying there's a creator of heaven and earth and believing in their authority structure. So if you guys don't mind, I'd like to read a couple scriptures of an example of that in scripture that I think is, you could just change the names and you could see how this stuff is being placed onto our current society, and not entirely to the point of persecution yet, at least not in the Western hemisphere, but we know that other countries around the world, believers are being persecuted all the time for their faith, specifically for their faith. Like we did a roundtable. Josh, I don't think you were part of that one, but we did a roundtable a few months back, maybe 6 or 7 months back. And I read a story from a guy in Africa who he knew that if he converted to Christianity, like he had a vision from Jesus, and he felt like Jesus appeared to him in a vision, and he gave his life to Jesus, and he told his family about it, and collectively with his family, he knew that he had about 3 days before the people of the tribe would find out and kill him.
Wow.
And with that knowledge, he still, confessed his faith. They end up trying to kill him, and someone saved him who was a secret Christian. The policeman that saved him was a secret Christian, and was like, don't tell anyone that I'm a Christian. So basically the point is, there are people all over the world actively being persecuted, which is going to be parallel to what we're about to read here. But I know that a lot of people watching this right now in the United States, we have not faced this type of thing yet, right? But believers throughout all of time and still today face having their faith actually be tested by sometimes literal fire, right? And so if you guys don't mind, I'm going to bring up a short passage, but I've got some other scriptures I've prepared to present real quick. And here it is. Okay, so can you guys see this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So basically, this is from 2 Maccabees chapter 6, verses 1 through 9. And I've added my own information in the red, okay, just to let everybody know that's watching. This is my commentary. So it says in verse 1, not long after this, the king sent an Athenian senator, Athenia, that they worship Zeus. This is ancient Greece. Sent an Athenian senator to force the Jews to abandon the laws of their ancestors and live no longer by the laws of God. So this is part 1, is they forcefully change your behavior. Also to profane the temple in Jerusalem and dedicate it to the Olympian Zeus, and the one on Mount Gerizim to be dedicated to Zeus, the host of strangers. And what's interesting here, this word, there's 2 things that's really interesting here. Is one, that there's a secondary temple in approximately 170 BC that the Samaritans had built in Gerizim. And I'm not sure if you guys were aware of this. Not a lot of people aren't aware of this because they think that the Bible is silent between the days of Malachi to Matthew, but it wasn't. It's just in the Protestant canon.
Yeah.
in this other canon, we have an entire historical record of what was going on in Israel and how they were facing persecution and having triumphs, both, right? And this is one of the days where they were having a failure and they were facing persecution. The Seleucids, from the rule of Greece, this is after Alexander the Great had taken over the entire Babylonian Empire and now was persecuting the people in Samaria, had come in, and in Judea and in the southern part of Israel, had come in, and they had built a secondary temple in Mount Gerizim in northern Israel. And there's a lot of history here. This is probably an entire separate show. I just think a lot of people aren't aware of this. They also had one built for Onias in Egypt under Ptolemy. That's a whole nother show. It's I don't have time to go into it right now, but what I think is fascinating right here is that they literally named it to Zeus. So they desecrated the temples and named them to Zeus. And specifically, one of Zeus's character descriptions is that he's a friend to strangers, or he's a host to strangers. Now, that word stranger is actually is a synonym for another word that's commonly used from the Greek into the Hebrew scriptures, which is the word alien. So sometimes it'll say, we'll read later in the passage, it'll say that this elder who remained faithful to God did not choose to worship an alien god.
Wow.
And I think that I know you might be saying, oh, that's just a coincidence of a word being used for a different occasion that they now use in the modern day in media for different concepts. I don't think it's an accident at all, personally. So Zeus was considered a friend to aliens and a host of aliens, of people that were strangers to the covenant of God. Anyone that was against the covenant of God, he's your friend.
Wow.
So it's crazy, guys. So as the local inhabitants were wont to be. 2, they corrupt the good places of worship. And this is what they try to see us doing today in churches that are now preaching the LGBTQ plus agendas. They're preaching all the woke nonsense. They're handing out what was the expose that a recent YouTuber did, where they found a church in Texas and I think it was in McKinney, Texas. They had a whole backroom closet that they had allowed for people to come in and get transgender clothing.
Wow.
And this is a church. This is a Church of Christ in Texas. You know what I mean? Or no, it was a First Christian Church in Texas. And you're like, bro, what? And it's ran by dudes that were obviously homosexual, like
Yeah.
not even hiding it. You know what I'm saying? So they corrupt the good places of worship, both through doctrine and through practice. They continue. The next verse says, "This is a harsh and utterly intolerable evil. The Gentiles filled the temple with debauchery and revelry." So for the people that are listening that may not know what that is licentiousness. That's, you're getting drunk on too much wine, leads to the breaking down of your morals. That's a common use of the word debauchery. And the revelry, that's a word that you can trace back to the golden calf incident, where it says they got up to play. That word revelry in the Hebrew is what's translated as they got up to play, which means they got up to engage in illicit sexual encounters. So you get drunk, you have an orgy inside the temple of Yahweh in Jerusalem.
Wow.
They amused themselves with prostitutes and had intercourse with women, even in the sacred courts. So number 3, they inject overt sexuality and lessen the standard of sexual chastity. And this is what we're seeing all across our culture and even in our churches. I'm one of those weirdos that thinks that there should be an actual dress code for church. but you see a lot of people showing up to church that are a lot of young women that are showing up very scandalously dressed, to a lot of churches. And that seems to be acceptable in a lot of these churches. So it goes on to say, they also brought forbidden things into the temple, so the altar was covered with abominable offerings prohibited by the laws. So this is where we read later in the book of the Maccabees, where it's Antiochus is forcing to sacrifice things that are not instructed in the law, and one of them was pork. They also sacrificed oxen and lambs, but it was a tradition of the emperors of Babylon. In case anyone's not aware, they also did this in AD 70 when Titus came in. Was they would immediately, when they conquered a place, they went to its main temple, the main seat of authority, and they went to that altar at that temple, and they sacrificed an ox and a lamb and a pig. Wow. And that was how they showed dominance over the gods of that region that they just conquered. They also brought forbidden things in the temple. I just read that. And this is the trappings and the decorations. The places of worship no longer represent Yahweh. So this is why they're changing even the look of the place of worship. No one could keep the Sabbath or celebrate the traditional feasts, nor even admit to being a Jew. Now, guys, the contextual use of the word Jew in the book of Maccabees isn't talking about you're strictly of the line of Judah, of one of the 12 tribes, or that you're a modern day, quote unquote, person that's involved in an Israeli born person involved in Judaism, or even an Israeli that's scattered amongst the nations involved in Judaism who rejects Christ. That's not the definition of Jew in the book of Maccabees. It's someone literally, the word Jew was given to the inhabitants of Judea and Samaria by the Greeks, and just lumped them all the different scattered tribes that were living there. They lumped them all as the Jewry. And that's how you can see it referred to in those types of writings. So no one could keep the Sabbath or celebrate the traditional feasts, nor even admit to being a Jew. So now you've got forced to change their culture, and their social intimidation keeps believers from revealing their covenant identity. And this is what I'm like. How are they going to treat believers when they say, well, we see what you're buying. We see you bought a Bible and a menorah and a shofar. And we see that you paid to go to this conference that's been labeled as a religious extremist conference called Take on the World TV, where they talk about all these fringe ideas that are bad for your ESG score. And so we're not going to let you into Whole Foods to buy some apples today. You see what I mean? So like they're forcing a social and cultural change by force. And we're going to talk about how they do it in legislation in a minute. But it goes on to say, moreover, at the monthly celebration of the king's birthday, the Jews from bitter necessity had to partake of the sacrifices when the festival of Dionysus was celebrated. They were compelled to march in his procession wearing wreaths of ivory. So now they're still being forced into someone else's identity to worship another god. Following upon the vote of the citizens of Ptolemy, a decree was issued ordering the neighboring Greek cities to adopt the same measures, obliging the Jews to partake of the sacrifices and putting to death those who would not consent to adopt the customs of the Greeks. Guys, in case you're not aware, in case you haven't studied the book of Maccabees or that era and that time period, this was, again, the Greeks through Alexander the Great conquered the entirety of the 127 different provinces of Babylon. He set up an authority in the city of Babylon as the headquarters of his kingdom after he finished conquering it before he died. So as the 4 generals took over, that's prophesied in Daniel chapter 11, the 4 generals that took over after Alexander the Great, one of them ruled Egypt. One of them ruled Greece, right? One of them ruled the Middle East. Another one ruled India. So the Greek and Egyptians get together and they say all the Jews within our territories also have to follow these rules the emperor is setting forth, or these Athenian senators setting forth, so that everywhere the Jews are scattered. Because this is a muddy time. This isn't a time period, 200 BC, but 200 years before Christ showed up. This is not a clean-cut era of the history of Israel. There's people still scattered from the Assyrians in the 700 BCs, and there's still people scattered from the Babylonians in approximately 600 BC. And they didn't all come back. A lot of them stayed scattered all throughout the countries around the Mediterranean and also into East Asia and Far East. So this is why we have in the book of Esther, we have the decree that has to go out, even though that was approximately, 5th century BC, a couple hundred years before this account. We have them also being persecuted everywhere, and they had to have that decree that went out. I love the Septuagint account of Esther because it expounds greatly on the decree and how they were able to defend themselves from persecution. And that was the wonderful thing, that Esther brought the favor of God to the people scattered everywhere through her influence on Artaxerxes. So this is a couple hundred years later. That favor's gone. New cultural changes are being forced upon all believers scattered amongst all cultures. So even though I've been mentioning the area of Samaria and Judea, this is applying to all believers who want to do the behavior of God everywhere within scattered amongst Babylon. And it goes on to say, following upon the, it was forced occult ritual practice. They had to partake in these festivals and in these processions, these parades to these false gods, or they would be killed. And they had these parades these are all the time. These are happening everywhere. I talked about the festival of Artemis that they would have every year in Turkey, where people would be sacrificed and they would try to run up this mountain and all this stuff. And they had these types of things going on everywhere. So now you have believers everywhere being forced to participate in this occultic ritual. Just like today, our tax money is being forced to provide for abortions. Our tax money is going into the money paying for the jab juice. Our tax money, and with everything that we've been reading tonight, they're planning to get us to coerce us into forced behavior on all these other things for censorship and control. So as it concludes in verse 9, it says it was obvious that disaster had come upon them.
Yeah.
There's more here, and I'm going to pull it up. I just want to get your thoughts on these first 9 verses first before I go into some of the other things.
So it was like, go to Mardi Gras or die.
Pretty much. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was really, what the whole thing was about is removing, not only trying to remove God from your life, but obedience to him, right? The very things that they knew, that Satan knows, that protect believers, is walking in accordance and in obedience, right? Because there are blessings to following the words of our Creator, and there are curses when we do that. That is exactly that whole thing. And I think that's why, Revelation 14:12, when it says, here is the call for the endurance of the saints, right? Those that keep the commandments of God through the testimony of Jesus Christ, right? That is that very thing, right? It is like, here is, that's like, the antidote to what they are going to try to do to us, right? They're going to do this again. And this is why it's so vitally important that our families, as men of the homes, we stay rooted. We teach our wives, our children, to stay grounded within the word and be obedient to the Father, right? Hear what he has for us, do what he has for us. And this is the only way we're going to survive this, right? If we are in covenant with him and we are in obedience with him within that covenant. And this is it. That is like what that whole thing is about. They have to deconstruct obedience in our lives, and they do it through desensitization, right? There's so many believers who believe, I've done this on one of our last shows, right? I showed the statistic of how many Christians believe that that are more pro-choice, right? It's literally in evangelical Christianity, it's around 60 to almost 65% are almost pro-choice. I mean, the lowest number is actually Catholicism, on that list based on a few, good polling that they've done. And look at how many people are, well, you can be gay and still be like this, right? You have everybody being so desensitized to what we see on TV, what we're heard, arguments of rape and incest, right? Oh my goodness, I wouldn't want to put a woman through these things. So automatically they are pro-choice. They believe in abortion. They're standing out there. The countless amount of deception that the adversary has for us, even if he can't get us to turn from our Creator, he just gets us to completely disobey what he has for us to do. Now that's every single day, right? On what we choose to watch, listen to, put into our minds and our bodies. That's the war that we all daily face. But this is that political realm that he has a great control over, just as they did at that time. And this is how it's being done. And so as men, we have to really guard our homes on what our families are watching, listening to, because it could be that quickly that our children are going, well, I don't think abortion's that bad. And here's why, Dad. I was listening to this guy. We're not being rooted in the word. We're not looking at, the truths of Scripture. And this is how they're going to do it again. This is how they've been doing it. And that is why I think Revelation 14:12 is so vastly important, that we're daily walking in that testimony of Jesus Christ, right? Remembering those spring feast of him coming and what he's done for us, to complete obedience and saying, you are the creator of this world. I will just obey you. I don't need to answer. I don't need to know why. I'm just going to do it, Lord. I'm just going to do it. And that's what he's looking for. He's not looking for theologians. He's looking for men that just say, I will.
And there's a couple more examples I'm going to have real quick from that same passage I read up to verse 9. But adding on to what you're saying, Chris, we're going to see that from those people being persecuted back then, their mindsets as they're being persecuted in this. And I think it's fascinating. And then right after a couple more of these verses, we'll look at some history of where Zeus worship happened, because this is what's going on. This is why the Athenian center came from Greece, to force this type of behavior on the people. And with this behavior is all the same behavior we see with Baal worship. That's why it's just a different name for the same pantheon of gods. I've tried to talk about this on a lot of different shows. The Greeks, they had their own names for the gods, as the Canaanites, the Akkadians, the Babylonians had their own names for the gods, but it's all the same practices because it's all the same pantheon. Remember, after the Tower of Babel, people walked away with different languages. They called the gods who did the same thing, they called them by different names. That's all it is. It's really not very confusing to me. So what we're seeing is all this same behavior. And in Maccabees chapter 6, verse 10 through 12, it says, for example, 2 women were brought in having circumcised their children. So these are women trying to obey the law of God. These women, they publicly paraded about the city with their babies hung at their breasts, then hurled them down headlong from the wall. Others who had assembled in caves nearby to observe the 7th day secretly were betrayed to Philip and were all burned together, because their piety kept them from defending themselves in view of their regard for that most holy day. Now, I urge those who read this book not to be depressed by such calamities, but to recognize that these punishments were designed not to destroy, but to discipline our people. In verse 13, it says, and in fact, not to let the impious alone for long, but to punish them immediately is a sign of great kindness. For in the case of the other nations, the Lord waits patiently to punish them until they have reached the full measure of their sins. But he does not deal in this way with us, in order that he may not take vengeance on us afterwards when our sins have reached their height. Therefore, he never withdraws his mercy from us. Though he disciplines us with calamities, he does not forsake his own people. Let what we have said serve as a reminder. We must go on briefly with the story. Eleazar, one of the scribes in the high position, a man now advanced in age, in a noble presence, was being forced to open his mouth to eat swine's flesh. But he, welcoming death with honor rather than life with pollution, went up to the rack of his own accord, spitting out the flesh. As men ought to go who have the courage to refuse things that is not right to taste, even for the natural love of life. Those who were in charge of that unlawful sacrifice took the man aside because of their long acquaintance with him and privately urged him to bring meat of his own providing. proper for him to use, and pretend that he was eating the flesh of the sacrificial meal which had been commanded by the king. So there's a little bit more I'm going to read, but what this is trying to say for everyone following along, just in case you missed it, he's under persecution, but because he's the high priest and he's in a position of authority over the Jewish people, he has some sense of interaction with the rulers over him from Greece. And the rulers over him from Greece are saying, look, we know you don't want to eat the pig, so you can bring your own meat to these meals and eat it privately, and we won't tell anybody. And he's still refusing, right? So I think that's fascinating. It goes on to say, so that by doing this, he might be saved from death and be treated kindly on account of his old friendship with them. But making a high resolve worthy of his years and dignity of his old age and the gray hairs which he'd reached with distinction and his excellent life, he even from childhood. And moreover, according to the holy God-given law, he declared himself quickly, telling them to send him to Hades. He just says to them, send me to hell. But guys, here's the deal. Hell is not the Catholic version of hell in the scriptures, right? Hades and Sheol is the place of rest where you wait for the resurrection, right? So he knows what he's saying. We just have to have the proper definitions of these words as they did. Verse 24, such pretense is not worthy of our time of life, he said, lest many of the young should suppose that Eliezer in his 90th year has gone over to an alien religion. Interesting, right? Because, and through my pretense, for the sake of the pretense he's referring to is like, if I just acted like I was eating the king's meat, but I was eating my own meat, that's the pretense he doesn't want to involve himself in. He says, the sake of living a brief moment longer, that they should be led astray because of me, while I defile and disgrace my old age. This sounds like Romans 14 to me. But anyway, for even if the present I should avoid the punishment of men, yet whether I live or die, I shall not escape the hands of the Almighty. Therefore, by manually giving up my life now, I will show myself worthy of my old age and leave to the young a noble example of how to die a good death, willingly and nobly for the revered and holy laws. And when he had said this, he went at once to the rack. And those who had a little before had acted toward him with good will now change to ill will, because the words he had uttered were in their opinion sheer madness. When he was about to die under the blows, I'm guessing the rack and the blows is he's getting hit with a whip, kind of like Paul had done to him 5 times and Jesus had done to him. And it says, when he was about to die under the blows, he groaned aloud and said, it is clear to the Lord in his holy knowledge that though I might have been saved from death, I'm enduring terrible sufferings in my body under this beating. But in my soul, I'm glad to suffer these things because I fear him. So in this way he died, leaving in his death an example of nobility and a memorial of courage, not only to the young, but to the great body of this nation. So here is the land area of where the senator came from, which is Athens, Greece. And as you see to the west, to the east of it is Turkey. And in Athens, Greece is long understood. And I'm just going over some of this basics just in case anyone in the crowd is unaware, because the United States has not the best track record with people that graduate from public school remembering their history. If I could just put it like that. I'm trying to say that in a respectful way, Josh, because I know that you're a school teacher. But if you pulled any of my friends from high school, none of them can remember any history.
No,
I was the weird guy that actually liked history and listened and stuff. So, guys, the Temple of Zeus, or at least what was left standing of it in Athens, Greece. Here's a picture of it. They had a full-on Zeus worship all over Macedonia, Greece, and this center mass here, is the area of Anatolia that the Romans called it. It's also was referred to as Asia Minor. This is where we see the letter to Ephesus was written. The letter to Galatia was written. This is Antioch, one of the Antiochs mentioned. This is Lystra and Derbe, some of the missionary journeys of Paul that we're going to read about. So this is the setting, guys. They all worship Zeus. Here's an actual Temple of Zeus in the Kavadarhishir district. I can't say that right. This is an ancient city in Turkey. This is one of the most well-preserved relics of one of the temples of Zeus in Turkey, literally with the carving statue out in front of it still. So, guys, just if you haven't seen my entire Investigating Babylon series, I conclude at the end that the character of the Zeus character is literally the Satan character in the Hebrew scriptures. So if the Satan character in the Hebrew scriptures was a rebellious angel, we're literally looking at what the ancient world thought a depiction of that guy looked like. And they've got all kinds of stories and discussions about how he interacted with the people and was seen and spoken to, and rulers and authority figures gave their allegiance to him. and he had his own temples and was worshipped. So I guess the reason I'm trying to draw out that for a minute is just to remind folks that this is not just made up folklore. This is not bedtime stories. Like, angels are real, so is the bad one.
Mm-hmm.
And good angels come and interact with man and give them a message, encourage them, and break them out of prison and do good things for them, right? Well, the bad one came down and did some things too. But he is the friend to everyone that's foreign or a stranger to the covenant of God.
Wow.
He is, the friend of the world, right? He's the rebellious one. He's the evil one. So, but he's a real character. He's a real person. So people have actually talked to this guy and interacted with him. And I would guarantee you, in some secret, dark, shady areas, they still do it today, because he's literally, as we see, he's the one whom, as Revelation 13 says, he's the dragon to whom all the world gives their allegiance, right? So this is a real character, and they had a real temple to him in this area that we're going to see in ancient times that was under the Greek and Roman empires. We're also going to see that Paul faced Zeus worshippers as well. And so this is the city of Azanilist, and there's Azanoi, and there's the Azanilist people. They respectively lived under the Phrygians, under the Roman Empire, under the rule of the kingdom of Pergamum. So that should strike a bell with us, right? We heard the word Pergamum. So we see in Revelation 2, 12 and 13, we have God who gave his the testimony to Jesus, who gave it to the angel who came and gave it to John on the island of Patmos. We have the message in Revelation. To the angel of the church in Pergamum, write, these are the words of the one who holds the sharp double-edged sword. I know where you live, where the throne of Satan is. Yet you have held fast to my name and have not denied your faith in me, even in the day when my faithful witness Antipas was killed among you, where Satan dwells. So twice he mentions their location. What an interesting thing that Yeshua would speak to these churches and says, guys, I know where you live. Like Russell, you talked about Mardi Gras, right? Just an amazing week of partying of debauchery and decadence and all that, right? Imagine the churches that are in there during that time, a mile away from Mardi Gras. You know what I'm saying? If Yeshua's writing them a letter saying, and they get the letter during Mardi Gras, and they're like, I know where you live, but you held fast to my name, and you didn't get some beads from a woman on a ledge.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So like, he's acknowledging, he knows that they're in the thick of it, that these people in he's like, this is where Satan dwelled. Look, guys, and in case you don't understand, not you gentlemen here with me tonight, but I'm talking to the audience. In case you're not aware of how the ancient world worked when it came to having multiple shrines to the same God and worshiping, there was, within a country or region, you had multiple shrines, sometimes within the same town, because if they wanted to indoctrinate people. But there was always one within that country that was the main point of authority. Just like in Jerusalem, we read about the two temples they had built. One was the one in Jerusalem was considered the main seat where Yahweh's presence dwelled. That was his main point of authority in Jerusalem. Okay. So in the pagan world, they would mimic that idea, and they would build shrines to all their different various gods. But there was always one that was like a main point of authority in a specific region. That's what Yeshua is addressing here, right? Yeah. Now, this doesn't mean that the literal person of the rebellious angel Azazel, that's commonly referenced as Satan in the Hebrew scriptures, literally just hung out at that temple all day. Just like Yahweh himself didn't hang out at the temple in Jerusalem, right? It's just the main point of authority where the priesthood served and did sacrifices to him. And you know what I'm saying? So that's why Yeshua would be talking about this particular place where Satan dwells, where his throne sits, if that makes any sense. Okay. So because I've tried to emphatically show where Satan actually stays on a regular basis in my Investigating Babylon series, which is also in the scriptures. So, but yeah, that's just the idea of this history of this whole region. And I'm bringing this up because I want to go to the scripture with Acts and Paul, because they walk into a town full of Zeus worshipers, right? And they're trying to live according to they're believers trying to live according to the truth of Christ and the law of God. And so they go into the area of Lystra, Derna, Iconium, and we see this here. This is the area of Pergamum. I'm trying to overlay that onto the kingdom of Pergamum that we just read about, was one of the territories in this area, just to give you a side-by-side to see, right? So we got Ephesus is on the western coast of Pergamum. Pergamum itself, the city within the territories up there. Galatia's up to the right. And then Cappadocia, that's mentioned in 2 Peter, the opening of 2 Peter. So yeah, This is the idea of where this location, this region was. But let's look at what Paul says right here in Acts 14, 8 through 13. He says, in Lystra, there sat a man crippled in his feet who was lame from birth and had never walked. This man was listening to the words of Paul, who looked intently at him and saw that he had faith to be healed. In a loud voice, Paul called out, stand up on your feet. And the man jumped up and began to walk. When the crowd saw what Paul had done, they lifted up their voices in the Lycaonian language. The gods have come down to us in human form. Where did they come from? They came down. They came down. Anyway, but that's for anyone who's seen the series, whatever. Verse 12, Barnabas they called Zeus, and Paul they called Hermes. So those are two names I've already mentioned tonight. Zeus is the equivalent of the Satan character. Hermes is the equivalent of the second beast. Because he was the chief speaker. What does the second beast do in Revelation 13? He speaks and promotes the first beast. He's the mouthpiece that does all the lying signs and wonders. So these gentlemen who worshipped Zeus and Hermes, just because this guy got healed from Paul and Barnabas, they mistook Paul and Barnabas for being gods. Right? And they were like, oh, Paul must be Zeus or excuse me, Barnabas must be Zeus and Paul, he must be Hermes, right? Probably because Paul was speaking more, right? Verse 13, the priest of Zeus, whose temple was just outside the city, brought bulls and wreaths to the city gates, hoping to offer sacrifice along with the crowds. But when the apostles Barnabas and Paul found out about this, they tore their clothes, rushed into the crowd, shouting, men, why are you doing this? We too are only men, human like you. We are bringing you good news, that you should turn from these worthless things to the living God, who made heaven and earth and the sea and everything in them. In past generations, he let all nations go their own way, yet he has not left himself without testimony to his goodness. He gives you rain from heaven and fruitful seasons, filling your hearts with food and gladness. Even with these words, Paul and Barnabas could hardly stop the crowds from sacrificing to them. Then some Jews arrived from Antioch and Iconium and won over the crowds. They stoned Paul and dragged him outside the city, presuming he was dead. So guys, this idea of the Jews all throughout Paul's missionary journeys and all his letters, this is, in my opinion, this is the thorn in his flesh that the Father didn't take away. They were always coming, they were following Paul, trying to steal the converts he had made. And they rejected Christ in favor of the traditions of Judaism, which is a separate thing I've tried to enunciate on my channel in great detail. So this is why I would say the Jews come in during the days of Paul, the 1st century AD, the same group of Jews that rejected and killed and slandered Christ and not John the Baptist, but just Christ. And now we're starting to persecute the disciples of Christ. They were following Paul around everywhere and trying to steal his converts. Right. So this is just, 200 miles south of Galatia, where they went to Galatia and bewitched people in Galatia away from Christ. Right. So this is why they come in, and them not being persecuted by Zeus worshipers, but being in accordance with them. Think about that for a minute.
Wow.
They then persecuted Paul, right, and tried to stone him to death. But what I think is fascinating here is verse 21 and 22. It says, they preached the gospel to that city and made many disciples. Then they returned to Lystra. They went to Derbe next, and they preached the gospel there and made many disciples. Then they returned to Lystra. So they returned to where Paul got stoned, Iconium and Antioch, strengthening the souls of the disciples and encouraging them to continue in the faith. And listen to what they say. We must endure many hardships to enter the kingdom of God. Like, that's crazy.
Wow.
You know what I'm saying? Just as hopefully a sobering wake-up call to some of the things we've seen the past couple of years that are all, finger in the air, trying to catch the forecast of the wind. All of it's pointed to them to ramp up those levels of censorship, the levels of suppression of the truth, which I 100% agree with Russell. It's not going to be vocalized as we're suppressing the gospel, but that is what it will turn into, right? That is always what it funnels down into, because there's nothing else to funnel it. That is the truth, right? The way, the truth, and life. So you've got to suppress the message of Christ and everything he brings and the covenant and everything, right? So this is where we don't have to read the rest of 2 Maccabees 7, but guys, I just want to get your thoughts. It's just some ideas of what we're seeing today, forcing you to change your mind, your culture, your ideas, your faith, your religion, go through the list, and tricking you into obedience, and at other times legislating you into obedience. This has always been the behavior of Zeus worship or Baal worship or Ra and Osiris worship. It's always been the same. This is why those countries have always collectively been a part of the Babylonian Empire. And this is why those countries were signified by not just the behaviors of their legislation and their worship of their gods through food and drink and particular behaviors, but also their architecture, right? They put the obelisks up everywhere. They love the obelisks, man. And they have these specific buildings that they've built. Like, if people don't know, the Lincoln Memorial is literally a replica of the Temple of Osiris in Egypt. People don't know that. We got the Osiris's symbol with the obelisk sitting out in the Washington Monument across from the Lincoln Memorial. The Capitol building looks like one of the temples in Egypt. I mean, I could go on, like literally pattern these things after it, guys. Many of us know this. Russell, I thought it was fascinating before the show that you mentioned some of your encounters. Would you be willing to share that publicly, or is that a private?
No, it's fine.
I was,
yeah, for sure. So before we came onto the show, we were talking about biblical cosmology, and I remember a few years back, when I had first gotten into studying biblical cosmology, it was all, you know how exciting it was when y'all first heard it and started looking into it, right? It was awesome. So I'm sitting here, I'm getting all into it, and I began to piece together from different drawings and pictures of Freemason symbolism and like their little, you know what I mean? I saw all the flat earth cosmology in almost everything that they had. Like, I was pulling up pictures online, like little drawings and stuff, and I saw it everywhere. And so I started to wonder, if these guys believe that the earth is flat and believe what the Bible teaches about cosmology. And I knew two Freemasons. There was an older guy, he was in his 70s, that went to church with me, and he was the poobah, right? He was like the Grand Master Mason of the area. And one night, it was a Wednesday night after church, we walk out into the parking lot, and we're looking up, and I was fishing. It was my plan the whole time. Like, I wanted to kind of just throw some things out there to see how he would respond. And so we're looking up at the sky, and I said, you know, when I look at this and I really think about it, and when I read God's word, I'm convinced that what we were taught in school about our universe, about creation, the sun, moon, and stars and everything, it doesn't add up. It doesn't match. I think they're lying to us in school, or we're being taught, untruths. And when I said that, you got to think we were both looking up, and I can see him in my peripheral vision. And as soon as I said that, I saw out of the corner of my eye, I saw his head do this, and he was like just staring into like my soul. Like, he was just mean mugging me, I think. Anyway, I look over at him, and he asked me, how familiar are you with masonry? Just from me saying that about the stars, his question to me was, how familiar are you with masonry? And I said, well, I studied a little bit here and there, and the conversation ended there. Like, that was the end of the conversation. He started talking about other things. At work, there was a guy who's passed on now, but he was older. He was in probably about 63 when I had this conversation with him, and his name was Wilson, and he was a Freemason. He's been a Freemason forever. And we would have different conversations about Freemasonry and stuff. But one day I was like real excited about biblical cosmology that I was just blabbing about it at lunch. I was just like, blah, 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 blah. Look at this, look at that, look at this, look at that. And getting all excited. And he started making fun of me in front of everybody. He just put me on blast. He was like, you believe this? Man, he goes, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard. And he goes around and he just starts to everybody, just making fun of me to everybody. Well, the next day, I'm walking into work, and I'm walking by his office, and he catches me while I'm walking by his office, and he's whispering. He goes, hey, come here. He calls me into the office, and he stands there, and he looks at me, and goes, do you really believe all that stuff that you were talking about yesterday? I said, yeah, of course, paraphrasing, but I was like, yeah, of course. He goes, hey, I can't say anything, or I'm not going to say anything, but you need to come on down to the lodge. And And that's when I was like, okay, I'm starting to see a pattern here, you know. I do believe that they know about biblical cosmology. I'm 100% convinced of that.
Oh,
Wow.
I agree. They do know. Yeah. In fact, I'm going to put this on.
Oops.
Go ahead.
Sorry. No, I was just going to say it's why they, you know, all the missions, they're all Freemason rituals. Every single Apollo mission was a Freemason ritual. And I think it was they are the partakers, or they are the keepers of secret knowledge, like they've always had. And this is a way of control, right? To control that narrative, because NASA was the very first time that this conversation was completely over. It was completely gone, completely over with. You know, when you study the history of you know, heliocentric versus geocentric, it was fully over at that point in time, and that's why all the astronauts are mostly Masonic. Is why all their symbology reveals this true nature, right? There's that underlining realm that they have to reveal these things, right? It's that whole you know, like L.A. Marzulli, as he puts it, that cosmic chess match, you know, of revealing. You know, there's this unwritten rule that he has to, you know, kind of state what he's doing, and they are this keepers of this knowledge. That's why when they say, well, you need to come on down to the lodge, well, why would they even say that? Why are many of them saying those things? Why are they holding back a lot of these things? Because they have that dichotomy of good and evil. They know truth and they know the counter truth, and they know how to control, and they're ultimately trying to bring scientism, is what they're doing, right? They use these things that Paul called false sciences as their mechanism. We see that today, the vaccines, we see it in every single aspect. You know, climate change is that woman was talking about. Every single thing is designed to control us, and that is through those sciences. And that's why cosmology, and that's why the truth of God's word from the beginning to the end is so vastly important. You know, at this stage of the game, that's why so many people are waking up to cosmology, and they're not being fooled by the rest of this stuff. They're going, oh my gosh, no, we live in a fixed, unmovable, geocentric, flat plane. That's what we live in, and he's right above us. They're discovering this, and they're not fooled by that. They're not getting jabs in their arms. They're waking up to these things, and that's why it's actually a really exciting time, because, you know, 2015, when many people came out, we were all crazy. But I will tell you, more people have reached out to me and my wife, other people from our channel, or speakers of ours. They all say the same thing. Their family members or their friends or high school people have said, you were absolutely nuts and insane, and we made fun of you behind our backs. COVID-19 hits, and oh my gosh, my world was rocked and changed. And I've gone down so deep down the rabbit hole. Can you send me more flat earth videos? And you're just like, what is going on here? What in the world is going on? Hold on, I got to share with you this video about sprites from these guys called the Flat Earth Brothers, and it's going to change your life, man.
Founded Earth Brothers now.
Yeah.
Well, he's old school. He brought back the old school.
Old school guys, yeah.
Another thing that my buddy Wilson brought up one time, speaking of these cryptic, strange conversations, I remember, like we were talking about before the show, how Freemasons, how I suspect that, I guess the ultimate secret is, and I don't believe this to be true, by the way, just disclaimer, that they believe that Jesus, or Lucifer rather, is the real, true, bright and morning star, the morning star.
Bro, this is exactly what I put up here. I was about to show and ask your opinion on. So these are Masonic tracing boards, and Russell, on your left hand side, what do you see? The one with the black and white checker floorboard.
Yep.
So do you see at the top left, there's the image of the sun. And then at the top
Mm-hmm.
right, there's an image of the moon surrounded by stars. So what's in the middle?
Good question, right? Yeah.
Well, this is what I've tried. The same thing in the other Masonic tracing board above the Greek architecture structure that looks like a Senate house. They have something else that looks like something up there right in the middle. This is consistent with all of their tracing boards. Well, not all, but all the ones that show this type of scene on the tracing boards. It's always sun and moon on the right-hand side, and there's something in the middle shining also, because they do believe that Lucifer is the light bringer, and it's not it's not the Jesus of the Bible. And I've tried to show on our Investigating Babylon series, literally this is that why they portray this in some of the tracing boards as the all-seeing eye. This is their God they worship, and he is the one that looks out over there and favors their endeavors, which is what that Latin phrase on the dollar bill. And he is the one at the top of the 13-step pyramid, right? And this is literally the home of the fallen rebellious angel Satan, also called Azazel.
Yeah, that reminds me. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, yeah, I'm done. I was just trying to say this is why they have to be cryptic about it, Russell, because if they I waited for 4 years to talk about this stuff on my channel. I wanted to give people 600 plus videos of me expounding upon the truth of the scriptures, Jesus Christ, the covenants, the first resurrection, the kingdom of God. I wanted to let people have a wealth of videos to refer to me as someone that is a student of the word who's not crazy. Because the moment I knew, because I figured this idea out, or at least my understanding about it, I figured out in 2015, and I tried to talk to people about it, and thought it was crazy. And it's literally the information that the Masonic lodges have always known. It is their secret knowledge where they learn by degrees. Who is their actual master? Who's the one they actually serve? And the scriptures have told us this whole time, it's Satan who deceives the entire world, right? It's the great deceiver. So sorry, Josh, to interrupt you. Go ahead, brother.
Oh, no. You talking about the Masons. Yeah, I don't like talking about those things a whole lot because it does make you start sounding like this crazy conspiracy theorist. But I just did a video on the guide stones because I live in Georgia, and I thought there's a lot of interesting things that tie into Egypt. And it's just mind-blowing how deep this stuff goes. And these things were funded. There was a documentary called Dark Clouds Over Elberton where they found out who made them. And it was, because it has that population control type of thing built into it to where people were freaking out. And so we know who did it. It was the Masons that funded it. And they were in partnership with the Rosicrucianists, who go back and they kind of have like Egyptian stuff and try to mix it with Christianity, but it's all pagan stuff. And you're looking at that light in the middle and wondering what it was. But I know they had a hole because I got to go see these in the spring, I guess early summer, late spring, before it went down. And they had a hole drilled in the stone that pointed out Polaris 365 days a year because that star doesn't move, just like the world doesn't move. And it was just like the guy that they actually bought the land from himself was a Mason. When they're interviewing him, they flash down to his ring and you can see the Masonic ring. And so the guy that they bought it from, all this stuff, and this guy that built it put it where it was because of the location to the sun. And he had to have been a geocentric believer to put it exactly the way it was. And, it was like a sundial, or not really a sundial, but had a hole where the sun would shine through and show them noon every time, throughout every day, because they care about the sun. But the thing that was really cool, that it blew up the day after CERN opened did their little thing. If it was a ceremonial thing or whatever, then they show us animations, kind of like NASA. But right before I put out the video, my brother sent me a video and he said, you got to check this out. And it was a guy talking about Revelation chapter 2, verse 13, the one you shared, where it says where Satan dwells, where they martyred Antipas. And when you go and look up where he died, it brings you to the location where CERN's at. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is, it literally says in the article, it says, I got it right here. It says the traditional account goes on to say Antipas was martyred during the reign of Nero by burning in a brazen bull-shaped altar at the Apollyon Temple in Lyon or Geneva, Switzerland. And that's where CERN is at. And where it gets, it just keeps getting weirder the more you look. But back in like 2009, there was a cube with the date, or with the number 20 and 14 on like 20 on one side, 14 on the other, and it was stuck perfectly into a cube-shaped opening in the guide stones. And I thought, man, 2014 came and went, because this happened back in like 2009. Well, I found out back when this thing blew up in Ethiopia, the year was 2014. They don't use the same calendar we use. It was 2014. They have an Egyptian inspired calendar, and so they go by like more of the Julian calendar. I'd have to do more research into that, but it was 2014 when these things blew up on that calendar. So just so many weird things tied into the Masonic, the Rosicrucians, all that stuff, and population control, things that are out there. So it's almost like they did it themselves, or they knew that too many people knew they put it there, so they had to take it down. And you don't demolish a crime scene. You're trying to figure out who did something. You don't go and just get bulldozers the next day and rake it off to the side. So it's kind of eye-opening for people to see that and go, man, this isn't conspiracy stuff. These people are actually putting these things out there. They tried to remain secret, but that's what kind of ended up transpiring. Creepy stuff.
Yeah. The I guess the Northern Star, or whatever, they believe to be the light bearer. I don't know. But I remember I was asking Wilson, I said, who do you believe the Savior is? Or who do you believe the Messiah is? Except, I can't remember. It was something along those lines. I was very pointed in the way I asked it. And he said, well, as a Christian, I would say Jesus Christ. And he said it just like that. Do you guys see a problem with that? Like, why would he have to qualify it? Why couldn't he just say, well, it's Jesus? Why does he say, well, as a Christian, I would say? Why would he have to be, say it that way? It's just, I don't know. And I love the guy, he's passed on, but, to think about him being involved in that kind of stuff.
Do they just encourage him that he can play both sides?
Man, I suspect that maybe they're just convinced that most people are ignorant of the truth, and that in order to protect the truth, they have to hide it, is what I think. To give it this sense of, this is a noble cause, you know what I mean? Type of thing. Like, oh, we have to hide the truth because people would then attack it or whatever. I don't know.
Well, that's why in Masonry, it's mandatory that you're part of some form of local church, some form of religion, so that you can mask, that you can be a part of. And that is where the recruitment occurs. That is where so much takes place, because within that masking who you are, you get to identify as something else, right? If you don't know the story of our good friend Nathan Reynolds, his family was Knights of Columbus.
Wow.
And as Knights of Columbus, they were deeply rooted within the Christian church. And in the days, they would be looking like they're serving God, but at night they're worshiping the dragon, they're worshiping the beast. And they if you don't know his full story, goes so deep into that. And that is, there is such a realm of that, you have to be on that yin yang, right? It's like, if this is who you are, you also need to become this. And that is that form of religion. That's why politicians have a belief system that they may not even believe, but they have enough knowledge to know about these things. That's why I'm going to say it. YouTube teachers. That's why you look at so many people out there. There's going to be wolves in sheep's clothing, as Scripture tells us. And if we don't think that these men are deeply rooted in occultism, that are wolves in sheep's clothing, not just men looking to prey upon children, that we've seen that occur, or prey upon making money. There is a deep-rooted agenda, and I guarantee you a lot of those men aren't going to fall like those other people who are just in it for selfishness. They're in it for the long haul. I could give a lot of stories and accounts of that. And I will do that publicly. I've been working on it with some things here locally and some things that I have discovered and pulled apart with the area that I live in regards of this in churches and Masonic connections and what is actually really occurring and happening. But it's why all our presidents, they're all Masons. They're all, why all of these things is all rooted in this ancient mystery Babylon religion.
I even suspect that the Gideons, the people that put the Bibles everywhere, I suspect that they're affiliated with Freemasonry too, and and I don't have any reason to believe that other than when I started preaching at this small country church, we had a guy from the Gideons come because we donate to the Gideons, right? So to put Bibles into people's hands. And he came to the church, and it was like probably 30 to 45 minutes before church started. And I remember I was just kind of standing there in the front of the church. I had my suit on, and he walked in, an older gentleman, and he came up to me and shook my hand, and we started talking. And he just straight up asked me. He was like, "Are you a Freemason?" Like out of the blue. I was just like, "No." And he looks at me, and he goes, "Well, it would be okay if you were." And I was like, "What?" And it was just, the conversation didn't go anywhere after that, but it was just really strange. Like, I don't know, man.
If you were.
Recruitment is down apparently in that.
I don't know. I don't know
So
why.
guys, this is
to become a Gideon, you must be a businessman, and that to be high, part of the ploy of being a Mason is what you can instantly get business wise with it, right? If you're struggling finding jobs or exceeding in your career, you line right up with Masonry, and your life just takes a different toll and different route if you're in with the right people. And so Gideons, as much as I agree with a lot of the premise that they do, right? And there's so many great stories that come out of there. You do see a lot of Masonry involved in these men of business, which now become part of these people who travel, and they become the Gideons. And I've seen that multiple times over as well. And they're part of that false light, which comes in and reveals something good, putting Bibles in hotels. You can't really go wrong with doing that. Passing them out to, kids walking the streets, sounds like a great premise, but who are the men behind this? And I know a lot of them are Masons.
Makes you think about the Shriners too, how they're involved with providing health care for little kids and stuff that can't afford it, and some of the best health care there is. They're part of those kind of groups too.
Do you guys see this that I'm sharing here, this tracing board?
Mm-hmm.
This is a modern tracing board compared to the older ones from the 1800s and 1900s. And this is for a first degree Mason tracing board. And I just, not only do you have the typical concepts, the square, the compass, the level, the plumb bob, you got the two pillars of, Jacon and Jobaz and Jacon, I think. But you got the moon on one and the sun on the other. And then you got a light source coming from the clouds. And that's not the sunlight. Right? And then across the pillar behind the three Greek women, you have this, what looks like this weird tesseract shaped thing that actually looks like a star when you look at it with a P1000.
Yes, it does.
Yeah,
that's what I was thinking.
That's crazy. Right? Yeah. Wow.
Now, look at the bottom, though. Look at all the symbols for the different religions at the bottom.
Oh, wow. Coexist.
Yeah. So that's always been like this. You can say you believe in Christianity and become a Freemason, but once you get to the higher levels, they're going to reveal to you who their God truly is. And then that's why in the lower levels, I think it's to get like third degree or whatever, they're like, believe whatever you want. You don't know enough yet. So they'll let everybody in because it's a cult. That's what cults do. They have to be around you long enough to get their hooks in you with their ideology. And, this is just from loose random testimony that can't be verified, but some people say they actually do things to get you in their hooks by entrapping you in certain situations that are compromising, or in certain financial schemes that actually have you basically could be incriminated for something, so they entrap you into something to keep you into the higher levels and to keep your allegiance. In fact, when I was younger, I worked for this, I was like 20, I think. I worked for this pizza place. The owner of the pizza place was being investigated by the FBI specifically because of his Freemason ties. This is in 2001. So, and I just stumbled upon that information because of another guy I knew whom so it's kind of I won't make this a long story, but I knew this guy that he and I used to go, and he was a very ardent, very zealous young believer. And I used to play the guitar at churches for youth groups, and I'd sing and stuff, and encourage people to put their faith in Christ. This guy would go with me, just to kind of go with me and be someone to go with me to these churches, and then he would pray with the kids and stuff, and talk with the youth pastors and stuff while I was on stage. And he just tried to help me in ministry, right? But this guy was he kind of had a screw loose in some areas, it felt like sometimes. So he went up in a random parking lot where he saw a clearly like a G-Man car, a clearly undercover, old Caprice sitting there with tinted windows, but they had like one of those police lights on the side view. And he walks up and knocks on their window, and he's like, "What are you guys doing? I've been sitting here for hours," because he could see them from his apartment. And his apartment complex was close to where this pizza place was that I worked, right? And so this is this random occurrence of like this guy that I knew, that I was doing ministry with at youth groups, randomly walks up to an FBI stakeout and knocks on their window like a dote. And they tell him, we're get away, kid. We're investigating someone at one of these businesses. Right. And he's like, but why? What's going on? So he actually decides to tail the FBI.
Dang.
So he gets in his car and he starts telling the FBI when they start telling the business owner to go home. And that's how he found out specifically who it was. And then he found out that apparently this specific car from this business owner was always being used as a drop-off car in this specific parking lot where these other guys would come by, and he tailed that car too. And they consistently, every Wednesday night for like 3 months, they would go to the Masonic Lodge, and the FBI would follow him, and he would follow all of them. And I was just like, dude, you're gonna get arrested. Just chill out. Just like, yeah, there's criminals doing things, and law enforcement agencies stake them out to try to arrest them. Just leave them alone. Just But thinking back now, I'm like, dude, the FBI was investigating a Freemason. Like just simple. Now, I personally think the FBI is highly corrupted at this point with all in the last 15 years with everything going on politically. But yeah, it was just interesting. And this actually was probably the Oklahoma Bureau of Investigation, the OBI. So they're a local branch, of the FBI. But yeah, man, I just think it's fascinating how these organizations exist out in the open, but they have to, like, the difference is they have to have people. That's why I think they keep trying to entice you, Russell, to see if you're interested, right? They have to have people that, for one, they're gauging gullibility. And I'm not saying that if anyone who has family members in the audience that was a high-level Mason, I'm sorry if that sounds offensive. I'm not trying to be offensive to you. But that's all it pulls down to. Like Yahweh says, people perish for lack of knowledge. So you can get caught up in some really bad stuff because you're gullible, you don't have better knowledge, and you get lied to and you believe it. Okay. So if you find a group of well-connected politicians and businessmen in your area that can give you all your hopes and dreams, is you just have to come to this lodge meeting and go help them do some good charity things from time to time. Oh, but then they invite you to an after party and suddenly there's a prostitute there who entraps you in a situation. And then you don't, you know what I'm saying? And then, oh, but hey, don't worry about that. We'll take care of that for you. We'll cover over for that. No one will find out about that. But come to this other meeting with us where they actually have an actual ritual happening. Right. So this is how they do it. And they've always done it throughout Memorial. So it's not like we're condemning these people. A lot of people get trapped in these situations. It's very rare, like we get to a place like we read in the Maccabees, where you have people that are ardent worshipers of Yahweh who get militarily imposed upon and forced to try to worship another god. And many, I didn't read chapter 7. Many of them willingly went to death and gave their lives. because they refuse to worship Zeus, which is Satan. So I just hope that believers hearing this, I just hope that you guys can have the same heart as the believers that we see in Scripture who faced the greatest empires on the face of the earth that ruled more territory, more wealth, and more kingdoms than the USA does, or the European Union combined. And they stood up to those empires and willingly went to death to say, I will not give up my faith in God. Right? They had a high priest at that day. We read the story of him in chapter 6 of 2 Maccabees, who willingly at 90 years old went to be beat to death because he would not give up his faith. We have a wonderful high priest who also was beat to death, but yes, the difference is he resurrected. And our wonderful high priest who ministers in the heavenly temple on our behalf, we also are under his authority, and we also will not abandon the faith, and no matter what comes. And because we see what they're trying to do, I just want to encourage people. It doesn't mean they're going to get away with it. I think we're all in agreement with that, right? They tried stuff. I think if they had their will, they would have locked down the entire United States in 2020, and they would have destroyed the economy. They would have instituted some sort of martial law, and they would have tried to fully change the Constitution and take over. But the people push back, right? So this is why I think they're starting the war narrative to try to implement a whole bunch of stuff with the multinational war narrative. So, guys, I just want to encourage you. Prayer does matter. Faith in your high priest Yeshua does matter. You do have weapons of warfare that you actively engage in through your obedience to God, so that you can be you can be prevented and protected from deception, but also you can actually walk in these troublesome times. You can either be a Daniel, or you can be a Tobit, or you can be a Judas Maccabean, right? Depends on what God calls you to in that area, that time. Or maybe you're a John the Baptist. You have a season where you're protected, but then that protection is over, right? So I just want to encourage everyone, though, that there are amazing men and women who are, like Hebrews 11 says, this world did not deserve them. And they've already given their whole life and their body's blood for the faith. And I think that we could do nothing greater than that ourselves if that came upon us. I don't want to make this a doom and gloom broadcast. I apologize, but we are talking about watching the signs of the world incrementally get closer to what the Bible's been saying this whole time. And people just like to focus on the eschatology of Revelation and forget that these are all just cyclical concepts that have already happened multiple times over in empires in the past. And all of it is from Zeus worship, Baal worship, Ra worship, all of it. It's the same pantheon of gods, and they have the same machinations of deception and enforcement. And it always boils down to, if you don't comply willingly, they're going to force you. And to me, like we were talking about earlier, guys, I think this is when they tip their hand, and that's when God gets involved, is when they stop. They can no longer, they've already hit their quota for how many they can deceive. And now they have to come in with force. And that suddenly enacts God to say, all right, I'm going to respond now too.
I think, as far as like them trying to come after and target Christians, like you were talking about their tactics with people that become Freemasons, how they pretty much entrap them in a situation. It made me think, man, we have to be really careful with what we do with our phones as Christians. Why I'm saying that is because even though you may not be doing anything illegal as a Christian, it's a fact that they already have a file on each of us. Okay, there's a data center where they keep everybody like logged, like everything that you're doing, every text message you send, everywhere you go, every web page you look at, every Google search you do. And they even have us categorized as fundamental extremists in these data centers. And I believe they're going to weaponize this type of information, this data that they're collecting on all of us, not to send us to jail, but to ruin our testimony. And so we have to be very careful as Christians to make sure that we're practicing what we preach, that we're living out the Word of God and trying to live above reproach. Now, I understand that nobody's perfect, but what I'm saying is we have to keep in mind that now there is actually a record being kept of everything we do, and I suspect that it will be weaponized against Christians one day.
Yeah, that is part of the ESG plan, is it further segments people into demographic blocks of statistics of what they've researched, what they're involved in, where their ideologies lie. And I agree with you. Someone's saying in the crowd, deep fakes. I was just going to mention both deep fakes and literal tech fraud. And I don't mean fraud from a criminal standpoint. I mean, literally the FBI and the NSA can just put stuff onto your phone or your computer through tech, and then suddenly they have a reason to arrest you. Like there's countless stories of people being raided and they found stuff on his computer and people were like, this dude wasn't that guy. He wasn't some trafficking ringleader of children, or, you know what I'm saying? They're like, and so the point is, all they got to do is just bring the accusation against you.
Yeah.
That's all they got to do. And so I agree with you, Russ. Not only should we obviously have integrity, do our best to not incriminate ourselves, but even then, it's like, what happens if you have good testimony of people around you because you have lived a life that's above reproach, and that people can say, you know what, someone deep faked his face onto that camera in that town. He wasn't there, and we got 5 people to tell me in testimony where he was actually, his location, because he wasn't away trying to do something secret. Right. And they can get around the deep fake accusation. You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
You remember when the data leak from that dating site where people were having affairs on the dating site or whatever?
Yeah.
And the data leak came out. You know how many deacons in the communities around where I live, how many deacons and pastors were registered on those sites?
Wow.
Like that's the kind of stuff that I'm thinking. I don't think that was an accidental leak, by the way.
Right.
Oops. Yeah. Oops.
Yeah, man, I agree with you. It's a rough time. Guys, we've gone almost 2.5 hours tonight, or 2 hours and 15 minutes. And I really appreciate you guys joining me. We're going to wrap it up here. I'm going to get to my Shabbatin and Shalom. And do you guys have anything you want to say? Russ, before you leave, do you want to talk about anything or announce anything?
Nah, man. I appreciate you having me on the show, and it's been a pleasure.
Awesome. Josh, what about you, brother?
Yeah, no, I'm trying to think all the things. There's always so many things going on. If you guys are in the Southeast, or even if you're not and you want to see Sean Flattoberfest, the dates, what's that, the 22nd, 23rd of October of this month?
I believe so, yeah.
Go see him speak. The tickets are outrageous. I had to take out a loan, but it's going to be worth it. We'll be there. Hopefully I can get my brother. I'll be riding along with Matthew Beavers back to the Covenant, and he and I he just co-authored a book together. It's my first time ever doing that, and he's just insanely gifted at writing really fast. He would do 2 chapters a day, and I would do 1 chapter total this summer. That's what I did in my spare time. But yeah, it's so we'll be there promoting that. So we'll hopefully meet some of you guys there.
Cool.
People that can make it.
Yeah, I think I'm scheduled to speak at 2:30 on Saturday, the 22nd.
2:30. All right.
Yeah, 2:30 Eastern Standard Time. So, and I don't know if it's going to be televised or filmed or streamed.
I hope it's filmed, because I want to be able to go back and watch it and pirate the DVDs or whatever I got to do.
That's right. Chris, what about you, brother?
Yeah, I had something. I'm just going to take it quickly back, which I think would be a great ending. Everything that you were talking about, Sean, from the Maccabees, right? Here is, we have in the time of the Maccabees, we have Zeus worship. We have this all throughout, where they served Asheroth and Baal, right? The same entities and spirits all throughout Scripture. We get to the time of Yeshua, right? And we have all of these incidents where all of the same stuff is happening. This is really some heavy stuff, right? But this is the foundations of those secret societies that we talked about when we get to Masonry. These are some really heavy things. And I think, you mentioned it before for a few people, listening, don't be offended. If your family's involved in this, I don't know about you guys, but I have 32-degree Masonry in my family line. And it has affected every generation after that. There is a generational aspect of that occurs, and that it's because these things are demons, right? The demons that are trying to still continually generationally bring us down. And, so if you have a family member who was a Mason, we're not saying everybody's bad, but we're telling you that there is demons and Satan himself, Hasatan himself, who surrounds himself within this occult knowledge, occult societies, not just good old boys meeting, as the safe phrase, the gatekeeper keeping them safe phrase, just boys being boys, that you'll hear repeatedly over and over. But these things need to be rebuked. And you can reach out to us over at Take on the World TV to go find us, takeontheworldconferences.com. You can email us in. There's a couple ministries that we've worked with that have very specific prayers for you to pray over your family, to rebuke these things very specifically, because there are very specific entities that are attached to each and individual different levels and realms. And if you don't know, it just doesn't go to 33 degrees. There are echelon levels that continue to rise and rise to the top of that pyramid that most people don't really understand or know. So reach out to us, if you're interested in that. If you have Masonry, Knights of Columbus, Shriners, you have these things in your family. Maybe these are the things why you continue to struggle. These demons still continue to surround you. Things that you're not doing in your lives, right, will open the floodgates to them. If you're not in obedience to walking in the commandments of God, you're going to open up these doorways to these familiar spirits that have been inflicting your families for generations. Masonry goes back really deep. So reach out to us if you want those, those prayers that you can have that are very specific. And then obviously staying, it within the word, and being in obedience, just like Revelation 14:12 is the endurance of those saints. It's not, deliverance ministries, they play a major factor in some of these things of how we can be that next generation to break that bond for our families and become that group of Revelation 14:12 that is enduring, that is moving forward, and that is the vessel to this world. So all that said, November 17th through the 20th, you can come find us over at Take on the World TV for the conference this year. And if any of you guys, Josh or Russell, you guys would like to present a presentation beyond anything that we're doing over there, feel free to reach out to us. We would love to have any contributions that you might have on anything that the Lord has placed on you that you want to share, and you want to upload a video to our conference. We would absolutely love that as well. And I know Josh will be getting together on a cosmology panel soon as well. So I'm going to reach out to a lot of different people. So that is everything I have to say. Sean, thanks so much for allowing me to be here tonight.
You're welcome, brother. And guys, I just want to end the broadcast tonight. This is the Lead Knots broadcast. It's a new series we started here in Kingdom of Context. And I just want to remind everybody of a couple awesome words from our Heavenly Father before we end tonight. He says, "My son, do not forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commandments, for they will add length to your days, years, and peace to your life. Never let loving devotion or faithfulness leave you. Bind them around your neck and write them on the tablet of your heart. Then you will find favor and high regard in the sight of God and man. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your paths straight." So guys, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I hope this is a blessing to you and collective audiences and everyone that's joined us in the live chat. Thank you so much for the super chats, everyone. And if you're observing the Sabbath, I hope you have a great day of rest, and we will see you guys next time.